Watch this. No way!
Alistair, welcome to Blackwell. You've been out for a wander today. How was it?
Well, last time I was here was September, and obviously since September we've had considerable amounts of rainfall and some heavy bouts of rainfall as well. So I expected it to be pretty wet underfoot, but it was walking the fairways. It was drier than I expected. But you know, we have certain challenges here that we're working on, and it's good to be back, and it'll be good to talk to the members tonight about Blackwell and how you're progressing.
Do you get nervous when you do meetings with members? And
yeah, I think there are always a few nerves there. That's a good thing though. It keeps you on edge and makes sure that you get the points across that you want to get across. But I've done a lot of them over the years now, so I'd like to think that I'm reasonably comfortable answering most of the questions that I might get asked. But you never know. You can always get a curveball.
So do you ever get some members that stand up and really?
Oh yeah, some members can get really passionate about the golf course. Golf club memberships are strange. You know, you'll get the 10% at one end that are really, really keen on the subject and really, really passionate about it, and then there's probably a percentage in the middle that, some of them will get exercised if the golf course is not too great, but most of the time everything's fine. And then you get the few at the other end that are full of praise for the greenkeeping team. But really, it's a tough life for greenkeepers at the moment. The game is hard, expectations are high. Climate is changing, legislation is changing, so it's tough for them, and we're here really to try and guide and support them, and also make sure that there's a pipeline for for the future, because without greenkeepers we haven't got golf courses. So they're absolutely fundamental. They're the lifeblood of the future of the game.
Yeah, and I guess golf clubs they're places of leisure, aren't they? And the members are so passionate about it, and that passion just sometimes spills over into, are we doing the right thing with this? How can we get the course in better nick here and there? And actually, that recognition that it's quite a detailed and technical subject area. I mean, I think I first got to know you, Alistair, through the reports that you sent out to the Blackwell membership, which I guess you send to a lot of the clubs, or all the clubs that you work with, and just talking about, or maybe profiling the course and the soil composition and stuff that actually all sounds quite technical. I couldn't believe that sort of 20, 25 pages in, I was still pretty engrossed in what you were saying about the makeup of the soil and the composition, and how you go and treat things like thatch build up. And I guess there's an element of just educating more and more golfers about what goes into getting the playing surfaces to the quality that they hope to play on week in, week out. Yeah, well, thanks, Bruce. That's a compliment that you got to the end of the report.
He's one of those passionate 10%.
I say I'm surprised. I mean, we do run a golf podcast, so you shouldn't be that surprised that we got all the way through.
When I sit down and write these reports post visit, it's always quite difficult to pitch them, because obviously you're trying to pitch to the members to a certain extent, and they are lay people. They want to understand a little bit more about the grass and the soil and the environment and how it all works. But they don't want to know, what percentage organic matter levels are and what they need to do perhaps to get them down 1 or 2%. So there's an element of pitching to the members, and there's an element of pitching technically to the greenkeeping side of it. And it really depends on the requirements of individual clubs as to how I do pitch it. So reports will vary a little bit. We obviously use a structure that we operate to try and keep things consistent, and obviously it's a journey, because agronomic change takes time. It's not something, we live in this sort of instant gratification society really now with respect to everything. But making meaningful change on golf courses does take time and a lot of effort. But everybody, particularly after they've had a beer down them, has an opinion on the golf course. So that's the interesting side of it, and that's really how I got into it. I was a junior member at Hoylake, going around the putting green sort of 19,000 times a day, as I did in those days, playing for Mars Bars with the assistant pros, and wandered in to get my lunch in the bar one day, and there was a group of members in the corner talking about the golf course, and there was a gentleman in the middle of this huddle, guy who turned out to be Jim Arthur, who was the my forerunner, really, my my almost my mentor, really. He was the guy who was the championship agronomist of the RNA in those days, and he was talking to the group of members about the golf course and about the soils and the grasses and what have you, and that fascinated me. And from that day, I felt, well, that's really, I'd really like to get involved in that and learn a little bit more about it. So a science degree later, and having played quite a lot of golf in my early years, managed to combine those two things and ended up working as an agronomist for the STRI in those early days.
So walking it backwards slightly, we've kind of just jumped straight into it, which is always the way, but it's always quite good to start enthusiastically. You say you got into it. What is it? What is your job? What does it entail in the marquee events, and what does it entail on a day-to-day basis? Okay, well,
I've worked in the early years, or for really 27 years, I worked as a consultant for the STRI. So the STRI was formed as the Board of Greenkeeping Research by the RNA in 1929. So obviously in those early years, it was the golden age of golf course development, golf course architecture, and there was an understanding that there was a need to support greenkeeping teams from a grass and soil perspective. So the STRI was set up in those days as the Board of Greenkeeping Research to support the industry, really, in the UK. And it developed over the years. 1951, it changed from the Board of Greenkeeping Research to become the STRI. And I joined them in 1988 and started doing bits of research, bits of work, trial work on the plots. I went out with the ecology teams, went out with sort of the course development teams, went out with the agronomy consultants. But I'd always had an interest in, helping and guiding golf clubs at the club level, course level. So that's really how I got into it, and then obviously did that for a long time. And as my career developed, I started doing more and more consultancy work for the RNA. So in those days, the RNA consulted or outsourced their consultancy work for supporting their venues. So I ended up doing a lot of that, a lot of support for RNA venues, Open Championship venues. I think the first Open venue I was involved with directly was Troon back in 2004. But I'd done work at other venues before that. So from then to now, really, I've done a lot of consultancy work at championship level, helping to deliver Opens, amateur championships, and other sort of international matches, Walker Cups, Curtis Cups. And in 2018-19, myself and a couple of my colleagues, Richard and Adam, moved from the STRI to the RNA. Because Martin Slumbers was the new CEO, and he liked the idea of taking the agronomy consultancy in house. So when I started the RNA in 2019, basic remit was to deliver support for the championship venues, but I'd always really wanted to not only do that, which was a passion of mine, but I wanted to be able to sort of advise and guide grassroots golf as well. So we talked about the opportunities that might exist for developing a commercial consultancy in-house. And at the same time, the climate's changing, pesticide legislation is becoming stricter, water is becoming a scarcer resource, sand's getting more difficult to get hold of. So the industry's having a tough time in terms of managing courses. And at the RNA, we felt, as the governing body of the game, that it was our responsibility really to try and support the industry in this area. So we agreed at the start of 2022 that we would launch this. So myself and a colleague, Gordon Howard, who is a drainage expert, we launched the commercial service to golf clubs in GB&I. And the last 2 years, my job really has been to deliver that and to grow it. And we're now a team of 4 at the end of 2023. It's gone really well, and we're looking to expand into Europe and beyond in 2024. So we feel now as though it's one of the pillars of the Sustainable Golf Department that we work for at the RNA, delivering sort of guidance and support really for golf clubs of all types throughout GB&I. So we feel as though we're accessible, we're reachable now, and that we're not only delivering our expertise to championship venues, but we're doing it for everybody, which is important, I feel.
And how much does that sort of knowledge change in terms of like what goes into maintaining great golf course. I'm conscious there's a few different sort of tangents we could go off on here, because obviously you mentioned growing up playing your golf at Hoylake, which is a fantastic Open Championship venue, at Links, and then maybe the requirements to make that the best that it can be versus a Parkland course right in the Midlands here, like Blackwell. I mean, has there been a lot of change in terms of the knowledge of the turf and what goes into making the playing surfaces their best? How much research sort of underpins that?
The fundamentals are pretty much the same. What's changed is sort of innovation and technology. That's improved in the time that I've been in this industry. So it's not so much the things we do; it's the way we do them. And obviously, there's more emphasis now on being able to do what I might call destructive agronomic renovation work without disturbing playing surfaces. So that's where the.
What does that mean? If you're going to put some colour on that, what
if we were sitting here in 1980, then really the opportunities to aerate a golf green would have been pretty fundamental. You might have had a cam action solid tining machine that would might enter the soil and go 4 or 5 inches down, and you might have had drum type machines that would work in a similar way, but would work shallower. And you might have sort of slitting tools that, again, would operate in the surface. All of those differentially damaging to the playing surface. Sort of late 80s, the vertidrain came along, the vertidrain is like a big mechanical hand fork, really. Okay. And it goes into the soil, but it goes into the soil to a greater depth. Originally a Dutch machine. But that's developed now, and it's much quicker and it's more versatile than it was back in the 1980s. So we can go deeper than we did before. We've also got things like compressed air tools, so we can aerate soil profiles and shatter them with compressed air. We can inject sand using tools like dry jects and similar.
So just a bit less destructive than.
So the tools will influence soil profiles without disturbing the surface quite so much. And I suppose my job is helping greenkeepers to determine which is the best route to take in terms of renovation. That's part of what we do, because if you leave a grass system to its own devices, it just vegetates itself. And what I mean by that is it just gets richer. So if we cut it, and whether we collect clippings or not, if you don't collect clippings, it'll enrich faster than it will if you do collect clippings. But even if you don't collect clippings, because we're putting water and fertiliser on it, these turf areas enrich themselves.
And by enrich, you mean just increase in density or
increase in density,
type?
But also the grasses lay down organic matter and thatch at the base of the turf, which, depending on the grass type that you're growing, is water retentive. Some grasses produce more water retentive thatch and fibre and organic matter than other grasses do. So grass selection is an important part of of what we do. But you can only grow certain grasses in certain environments. So often the starting point for a lot of clubs is setting the correct environment for the grasses that you want to grow. And then once you're able to grow the right grasses, then the maintenance of those grasses becomes easier, because the best grasses enrich themselves more slowly than the less desirable grasses. Does that make sense?
So that's the fundamentals, I guess. If we just take a step back, I mean, that was fascinating hearing about how the technological side's moved on, but I guess the fundamentals, and I'm conscious that we've got quite a well-informed audience.
We're going so deep on grass here. I want to get, this is going to, I'm so excited.
But I guess and you really want to go, you quite literally want to go deep on the grass stuff. But I think at a higher level sort of view of what golf clubs really need to achieve, and those fundamentals of, soil composition, what grass types certain clubs might want to get to. Can you maybe just shed a little bit of light on that, please, Alistair?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, one of the great things about golf is that you can play it in almost every environment on the planet. So you've got golf courses on the tops of mountains, you've got golf courses on links land, you've got golf courses in parkland situations, you've got golf courses on moorlands, heathlands. They all have their attributes, they all have their own strengths, and they all have weaknesses. Now, ultimately, what you can achieve on a site depends enormously on the soil that the golf course sits on and the vegetation that soil then supports. So the Golden Age architects were absolutely fantastic at identifying great sites for golf based on the vegetation that grew on them. So take the links out of this, because the links are just very obviously great for golf.
That's where it started.
Because the grasses don't grow very fast, so you don't need to cut them very often. They're on sand, so they drain really well. There's no real vegetation on them, so you've got no light and air circulation problems. So before you even start, you've got 3 big ticks in boxes there. Now, once you move the game away from the seaside, those boxes become unticked at various levels. So soils become heavier. So sands turn to silts and clays. Silts and clays don't drain nearly as well as sands do. So you've got everything from sands to clays on golf courses. Now, golf courses are compared by their members from one to another. But perhaps what they don't appreciate is that, the soil is pretty much everything once you may move away from the seaside. And the heavier the soil, the less suited it is for golf. And the harder we have to work to make that soil suitable for golf, particularly for year-round golf, which is what folks want now, because they've got better shoes, they've got better waterproofs. So, the golf technology around the game has improved massively in the time I've been working. So the demands on me and the greenkeeping teams have enhanced because of that. So the golden age architects were great at identifying good inland sites as we moved away from the seaside.
And they do that by what grows there. Or,
yeah, absolutely. So you know that if heather grows on a site, it's probably going to be acid and it's going to be sandy. Acid means that the grasses that you're going to will grow there naturally don't grow very fast. So that's a good thing, because heather is an acid indicator, and it does well on acid sands. So the first move away from the seaside was to the heathlands of southern England and
Surrey,
northern England and
Berkshire,
Scotland. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got groups of fantastic golf courses. So obviously the game spread from the seaside to those sorts of courses. But inevitably it became so popular that it then had to move to sites that were perhaps less well suited to playing the game. Now, in those days, it wasn't a year-round game. It was pretty much a summer game. But interestingly, I've thought about, a lot of the bigger clubs have spring and autumn meetings. Why do they have spring and autumn meetings? They tend to be the big meetings when members gathered. And those were, in those days, in the early days of golf, the spring was a great time to play golf because the grass really wasn't growing. They couldn't cut the grass very well, so they wanted to play golf when they couldn't cut it, so they played it in the spring. And again, they played it in the autumn when similar characteristics prevailed. So I'm pretty confident that spring and autumn meetings sort of evolved that way.
Because they were the best times to
linked to grass growth and lack of grass growth.
And of course, they wouldn't have played in the winter, so it would have indicated the start and end of the season. That would
Absolutely.
have been that.
Yeah.
And it's the summertime where I guess particularly on links courses, the rough can grow up and it all of a sudden actually becomes quite challenging and a bit
unplayable
a bit
at times.
penal.
Yeah. Or could have done in those days when they didn't have the tools to cut the grass.
So as we expand to less desirable soil compositions, within those that there are not so free draining soil compositions, clay based soil, you then get a prominent growth of meadow grass, I suppose, which is then where things become a little bit trickier.
Yeah,
now I know nothing about. I pretend to. I've got an amateur interest, but please enlighten me.
So let's go back to the links. If we go back to the seaside where you've got desirable conditions for golf and desirable soil conditions, we've also got a preponderance of desirable grasses. And the desirable grasses that we go on about are Benson fescues, essentially. So Benson fescues do really, really well at the seaside, fescues particularly. Fescue is a fine-leaved needle-type grass that provides natural pace, natural density, natural disease tolerance, natural drought tolerance. It's a fantastic grass. It's the elixir, really. It's what we're aiming for.
And this
everywhere.
is because of its fine sword. I'm going to show off here. Because of its fine sword, you can cut it longer.
I know nothing about agronomy.
It'll still photosynthesize and it'll still roll well. So you get.
Yeah, so you can
aggressive
cut fescue grasses a little bit longer, and they'll still give you good speed and good texture. Essentially, what we're trying to do on these courses is cut the grass as long as we can to give us the playing quality that we need. So we don't want to cut grass low, because if we cut it low, then there's the lower we cut the surface leaf, the less root growth we will get underneath the stuff. Now, the less root growth we've got, the more vulnerable the turf becomes to drought stress, and the more fertilizer it needs because it's not taking water and nutrient from as big a reservoir. So we're trying to develop as strong a root structure as we can. Now with fescues, we can develop that strong root structure by cutting maybe at 5 mil, 4.5 mil. We can produce good surfaces at those sorts of heights. For championship golf, we will probably be at 3.5 to 4 mil, but we try and avoid cutting greens below 3.5, even for opens. And we can produce really good championship major level playing surfaces at those sorts of heights of cut. As the grasses change, then there is a requirement from golfers to go lower because the leaf blade's fatter, the growth is more regular, and
as the ball rolls through it.
It's a stickier surface. The morphology of meadowgrass is just very different from fescue, so it needs to be cut lower to give you that same sort of quality of ball roll. So as soils become richer, then it becomes more challenging to grow fescues, primarily because fescues tend to get out-competed by more aggressive grasses. So fescue really is what we call a stress tolerator in grass terms. So it does well in environments where there is an element of biotic stress. That might come from a lack of rain, lack of water, from drought. It tends to outcompete other grasses in those sort of dry situations, which is why it's well suited to the dune lands and the links golf courses. Once you put it in a heavier soil that doesn't drain so well, and that has more inherent nutrient in it, then other grasses like bent grasses and particularly meadowgrass, which is the scourge really of golf courses, but it's also the saviour of golf courses, that tends to dominate. And as we cut lower and lower and lower, then that tends to favour the bents and more so the meadowgrasses as well. So as the environment changes, so does the vegetation type that we play the game on. Now we still try. What we're trying to do inland is really mimic what we get at the seaside, because the seaside tells us an awful lot that is good about golf. So, why wouldn't you try and copy that inland? And of course, when these great early inland golf courses were built on the heathlands, there weren't any trees or any vegetation about, so there's lots of air and light, and there was a better chance of growing, the finer grasses, the bents and fescues, on the heathlands. But as these sites have become more vegetated over time, and we've changed the way we manage them, and we've become more sort of ordered about the way we want our golf courses to look. It's really meadowgrass that has become the grass that we predominantly play the game on in the UK, and I don't say that with any pride, because that I think is a retrograde step that has happened to a lot of golf courses over the last sort of 50, 100 years. And we're fighting that. We're fighting that all the time. So we accept meadowgrass as a grass to play on because it has certain attributes that we can use. It's fast growing, and it recovers itself very, very quickly. But it's very shallow rooted. It's very disease prone. And as we enter this era of sort of pesticides becoming less available to greenkeepers, meadowgrass dominant swards are going to become more and more challenging to look after.
Do you think that's partly where the predominance of meadowgrass has come from, is the ability for greenkeepers, green committees historically to rely on a lot of fertiliser and chemical treatment to, I guess, treat these grasses, treat disease, get them very uniform, cut them very low, replace greens if they want to, if they've stressed the grass too much. And that's now, we're entering an era where that can't continue.
Yeah, absolutely, really. And we look back to the history of the game again. I mean, pre-Second World War, we really didn't have the ability. We certainly didn't have prilled fertilizers. And what I mean by prilled fertilizer, sort of compound fertilizer that's in a form that you can easily spread on a golf course. So really, pre-Second World War, fertilizer was being applied in powdered form. It was a very dirty, it was a very slow, cumbersome process. So that limited really how much nitrogen we could put out. Post-Second World War, we enter an era of prilled compound fertilizers, so suddenly we can apply a lot of material very quickly to golf courses. And at the same time, obviously the technology, the wartime technologies allowed a lot of these hormone herbicides and pesticides to be developed, which allowed us to control weeds more effectively, allowed us to control, fungal pathogens more effectively. So the industry changed enormously post-Second World War in terms of what we could do. And obviously, from a technology point of view, mowing technology improved as well. So we, incrementally, we've been able to cut greens lower and lower and lower and lower. So it's a combination of those things that have played into the hands of meadowgrass and have made it, more difficult for us to, establish and grow bents and fescues away from the seaside, despite our best efforts.
So we sort of become victims of our own kind of technological innovation.
We have.
And we now think, that's all happened, and we find so many inland courses have got a high proportion of meadowgrass there because of this innovation that came along, whereas we'd almost be better off without it, because you'd be forced to, or I guess that would encourage soils that are maybe less rich, and the finer grasses could kind of grow and prosper.
Well, the maintenance programs on the links courses have changed the least over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And, the guys that are looking after the top-end links courses now in the UK are really switched on people.
You're saying they've got it easy. They've got the easiest jobs.
I'm not saying they've got it easy. It's the greenkeeping is not easy at any level on any site. But it is certainly less challenging to grow fescue by the seaside than it is away from the seaside. Yet we all want firm, fast running conditions. We all want to play golf on the ground. That's they're the buzzwords for British golf. That's what we're proud of as a nation in relation to the game. But delivering that, can be challenging. We can do it away from the seaside when the weather plays ball. But obviously, when we've got heavy soils and we've got heavy bouts of rainfall, it becomes challenging to drain that land effectively enough to allow us to grow the grasses that we want to grow.
So I'll try and not use Blackwell as a test case, but it's easy because we're here. Blackwell, for those that don't know this and this podcast, we're in the Midlands. It's the heart of England. We're about as far away from the seaside as you could probably get, although it's somewhat sandy soil. What should a club like us be aiming for in terms of grass composition, and how do you keep a golf course healthy in this sort of environment?
Okay, well, without being too specific, what you can achieve goes back to the soil again. So really, when I say a lot of, that would be wrong. A certain percentage of inland UK golf clubs have rebuilt greens over time. So effectively, they've hollowed them out, they've drained them, and they've deposited effectively a sand base on those greens. Again, mimicking what we find at the seaside, and you'll hear terms like USGA guidelines used for, which we've used for for greens construction in the UK for many years now. So there are inland golf courses out there that have got USGA type greens.
And what's that? Is that a 200 millimetre sand cap?
It effectively means that you've got a drainage system at the base. You've got a drainage carpet that sits over that, and then you've got 300 millimetre depth of a specified sand which sits over the top of that. And
because of course that's the opposite of what the Golden Age architects used to do. So they used to put a little deposit of clay down because they couldn't, to try and keep water retention.
Well, on the very sandy sites, pre-irrigation, which is something we haven't talked about, but pre-irrigation, the sandy sites struggled with drought in the summer. So it was not uncommon for the likes of Harry Colt to build what we call dew pond greens. So they used to put a layer of richer material in the profile and then growing medium on top of that. And the idea of that was to retain moisture during the summer months, so they could retain a reasonable quality of putting surface during extremes of weather. And we find those now. Some of our top links and heathland golf courses still have dew ponds underneath them. And with irrigation that we now have, those can be a headache because they impede and interfere with free drainage, which then interferes and impedes with the growth of the grasses that we're looking to encourage. So there are all sorts of different types of green construction out there, and what you can achieve is very bespoke. It's very bespoke to the site. It depends on the soils. It depends on the green construction. And to say that greens have been reconstructed, not all of them have been rebuilt to USGA guidelines. So you've got everything between what might be an amended clay soil root zone right the way up to USGA. Yeah. And on some clubs, you've got 6 greens that have been done. Others have got 9 greens that have been done. So, you're dealing with a potpourri of circumstances from club to club.
Is it more important to try and get it uniform across a site as opposed to try and aim for a specific thing?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that you want 18 greens to be as consistent as possible as a golfer. Whatever caliber of golfer you are, you want to be walking onto 18 greens that perform similarly. And obviously, you've got different types of construction. Then you've probably likely got different types of grass as well, and that can become really quite challenging to produce 18 consistent surfaces. Which why you might hear in the bar, the eighth green's softer than the ninth green. Why is that?
One's rolling quicker than the other.
The eighth green's got more meadowgrass in it than the ninth green. The eighth green's got more disease than the ninth green.
Perhaps you could solve an urban myth. I've heard here the Blackwell's 18th, if you haven't seen it, it's got a massive tree basically on it. And they always reckon that's,
a foot
that
quicker.
much quicker. A foot quicker. I was going to say a foot quicker on the stem, but they're a foot quicker because it's being drained. Is that a thing? Is that real?
Well, think about it. I mean, the roots of an oak tree are going to be far more efficient at pulling moisture and nutrient out of a soil than a little meadowgrass root, a meadowgrass that's mown at sort of 3.5 mil. So the poor meadowgrass plant, is really struggling against that oak tree root, and those oak tree roots will be well under the green. So I mean they'll be that tree will be mopping up plenty of moisture and plenty of nutrient from beneath that green, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
Because I guess I'm conscious that we're talking about it, that we're recording this podcast after a prolonged period of just torrential rain across the UK, and I guess a lot of the early part of the discussion was framed around drainage and making sure the surfaces can kind of withstand a lot of rain. But equally, there's the point you touched on earlier when we talked about clay-based greens and how architects such as Harry Colt used to do that to retain water in the summer months. I mean, these finer grasses, do they basically withstand both types of climate or both extreme types of climate better than the likes of the meadowgrass, for example? So it's something like a fescue that can deal with drought, but it can also deal with the deluges that we've had in the last few weeks better than different species?
Fescue does not deal with deluge and with wet soils particularly well. Fescues tend to do best. They'll do well in sort of acidic sandy sites. They'll also do well on alkaline sandy sites. They do very, very well on the downland golf courses. So you've got chalk underneath you, then fescues can do quite well. That's because really in an acid situation and an alkaline situation at the extremes, nutrients get locked up and are less available. So when there's less nutrient available, fescues do well. Back to the stress tolerator thing I talked about earlier on, that they tend to compete better when there are the stresses as a result of the soil or the climate. So in heavier soils on wetter land, you will tend to get more meadowgrass meadowgrasses, Yorkshire fogs. Bentgrass will do better in wetter soils than fescue will. And so on those wetter sites, we tend to transition more towards bent than fescue as a solution, and the bent is a good sort of cohabiter with meadowgrass as well. It blends. It's to say it's got a similar texture. Texture is a little bit different, but it can be managed by good greenkeepers to produce a good blend of turf, and a meadowgrass bentgrass blend is more durable, more resilient, more sustainable than a straight meadowgrass monoculture. Because again, it's something that I've always passionately believed in, and something that a lot of the great golf greens do have is that they're in this country anyway, they're multicultures rather than monocultures, meaning that they have more than one grass in them. You look to some of the golf courses in the United States or Southern Europe. They would be monocultures.
There's a big strive for that, though, isn't there? That albeit you do hear a lot of people saying that we're 100% fescue our site, or whether it is somewhere like I don't know if Augusta is monoculture, but I know they're creeping bent, aren't they? And there's a big strive for a monoculture.
Make it look like a snooker table of just consistency.
But we
and
don't tend to have a huge amount of that here, do we?
Well, that's a very expensive model to try and perpetuate. It costs a lot of money, and it's high maintenance. Never work. Now, that's not to say that it can't work in the UK, and there are some clubs that espouse that model. It's not something we would necessarily advocate, although, what is sustainability when it comes to golf greens? It may well be that a certain club would regard a monoculture of creeping bentgrass as sustainable for them.
Yeah.
And if they've got, unlimited resources and a big budget, then that's fine. And they can produce that level of perfection. But for the majority of golf courses in GB and I, that is not an option. So you work with nature and you work with the grasses that you can grow on that site. Now that normally means a multiculture in almost every case, because the minute you've got meadowgrass, you've got a multiculture, essentially, because there are over 100 different ecotypes of meadowgrass. So there are some
meadowgrass.
meadowgrass.
We won't ask you to name them all.
No, please don't. But there are some meadowgrass plants that are very bunchy and coarse-leaved. There are other meadowgrass plants that are very, very fine-leaved. There are meadowgrass plants that produce a lot of seed head, even at greens height of cut. There are other meadowgrass plants that don't produce much seed head. There are some meadowgrass varieties that just get nuked by anthracnose and fusarium as turfgrass diseases.
Are there any desirable meadowgrasses?
Well, the thing you've got to bear in mind with meadowgrass is that on a lot of golf courses in the UK, because the soils aren't great, if we didn't have meadowgrass, we wouldn't have any grass at all. So meadowgrass provides an opportunity for a lot of people to play golf. Now, we're always striving to work away from it or make the meadowgrass that we've got as healthy as we possibly can and as sustainable as we possibly can, because one of the other drawbacks of meadowgrass is that it's very disease prone, and particularly the fine-leaved cultivars, the seedling cultivars of it, that tend to be perpetuated by low mowing. Because meadowgrass completes its life cycle very, very quickly. It evolves very quickly. So if you cut it very, very tight, it will evolve into quite a tight, dense turf. But what we've found through research is that those ecotypes of meadowgrass are particularly prone to diseases like anthracnose and fusarium. Anthracnose will attack meadowgrass turf any time from sort of late July, August onwards, although you can get it any time of the year. But wet soils, low nitrogen levels will encourage anthracnose. And then fusarium is a disease we tend to get more of, through the autumn and winter time, when grass growth is very, very low. A bit more aggressive than anthracnose, but equally, if not more damaging. And some of these biotypes, ecotypes of meadowgrass are particularly vulnerable to those fungal pathogens. So as pesticides become less available to us, we have a bit of a headache in terms of controlling these diseases.
And the only way to do that is just to not have meadowgrass, is that?
No, I mean, what we've got to try and do is we will always try and work away from meadowgrass and try and promote bentgrass where we can, but we've got to create an environment that will be accepting of that change. And that's more than just soil and drainage. That's about the wider environment around golf greens and golf tees as well. We need air and we need light. Right. And golfers often massively underestimate the impact that light has on turf. It's huge. And I was out there this afternoon looking at a couple of the greens here, and you can see already that some of the meadowgrass turf around the perimeters of the greens is starting to weaken, particularly in shaded areas. Now, if you think of perimeters and edges of golf greens, they're always cut twice. Because when greenkeepers cut a green, they'll cut it longitudinally or whatever way they cut it, and then they'll do a lap cut around the edge. So the lap cut is effectively a double cut. So that's an additional stress. So by the time you've done that 100 times at the end of a season, and the sun's getting low in the sky, it tends to be those areas, particularly where they don't get morning sunshine. It's those areas that tend to weaken first. And the meadowgrass turf sort of opens out, it weakens, it can get diseased. I mean, your greens are clean at the moment, which is great. But when you get open space at the base of the turf, you get things like moss and algae colonising those areas, which it can then be troublesome to get rid of the following spring. So the environment, setting the environment, is absolutely fundamental to growing the right grasses and improving the sward composition on a golf course. So we talk a lot about, let's improve the grass composition on our greens. Well, it can be done, but it's a slow process, and we need to create the right environment to do that before we start.
And how long is that process, Alistair? And what does that involve? I mean, I'm conscious that I'd like to think, a lot of people listening to this podcast are pretty high IQ golfers, but there may be one or two out there who kind of, I guess we're all in that boat at a certain point, I guess, where March rolls around and the greenkeepers come out on their equipment and start punching greens and sanding and top dressing. It's the surfaces were just getting really good. And the same happens in August. But as you're about to tell us, that is something that's pretty fundamental for helping to change the composition and make sure that we can encourage the grass types that we want, that are healthy, to give us good playing
Yeah,
surfaces in the long run.
we've got to look at the year holistically, and one of the great things about greenkeepers will tell you this, that no 2 years are the same because you don't know what you're going to get weather-wise. But historically in the UK, certainly in my time, in recent years, springs have been challenging because they tend to be cold and they tend to be dry. So, of course, what we're looking for in the spring is grass growth. We want the soils to warm up. We want a bit of rain, and we want the turf to recover from the stresses and weaknesses of the winter, be that disease or just wear and tear, thinning of the turf. So what my belief is that fundamentally we don't want to do too much aggressive work in the spring. Now, again, it depends on your soil, it depends on your circumstances. You might have to. But generally speaking, I tend to avoid recommending too much aggressive work in the spring. Because if we do that and we get the timing wrong and the weather's not helpful, it can just take forever for the, for those tine holes or whatever we do to recover. So we'll tend to do some work in the spring, but it'll tend to be low level. We'll tend to, focus on getting the turf going, getting it moving, getting a surface. The other thing that tends to happen in the spring is again, back to the multiculture issue. Grasses tend to grow at different rates when they start growing in the spring. So the bent grasses tend to start growing before the meadowgrass. So if you've got a bent meadowgrass blend, you'll tend to get a little bit of uneven growth, differential growth as we call it. So it's sometimes quite a challenge for greenkeepers to to overcome that because it can lead to bumpy surfaces without any holes in the turf. So we're trying to meet the demands of the grass, and we're trying to meet the demands of the golfer. And there's a sweet spot there, and we're continually trying to hit that sweet spot, whether that be March or whether it be June or whether it be September. But as I've tried to allude in the podcast, the grass needs a certain level of maintenance to keep it in a form and a state that will provide quality surfaces for play.
In a fairly basic, like speak to me like I'm an idiot. Pretend I'm an idiot for a moment. It must be very hard. Why do you do the work in the first place? What is the point? Are you trying to introduce, when you punch it or vertidrain it, what are you trying to do that helps the grass?
Well, different techniques do different things to the profile. But in essence, one of the big measures that we go by now is organic matter. So in simple terms, a soil consists of organic matter, which is the living part of the soil. So that contains old roots, old stems, living material, bacteria, fungi, microorganisms, different types, nematodes. All of those things are contained within the organic matter.
And how would they live, 2 inches beneath the soil?
There's organic matter right the way through the profile, but organic matter tends to accumulate faster beneath golf surfaces in the top sort of 20 to 40 millimeters. Okay. So that's the zone that we have to manage aggressively. But back to the soil. So the soil is part organic matter, and if we're in good shape, your organic matter numbers will be around about 5%. But in the UK, we will encounter organic matter numbers between 2% and 20%. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're up at the 20% level, you've got a lot of thatch, you've got a lot of organic matter to get rid of. There are various techniques that we would use to get rid of excess organic matter, hollow coring being one of them. Sand injection, scarification would be another one.
And what is thatch?
Thatch is essentially organic matter.
Okay.
Which just builds naturally at the base of the turf. Now, thatch will build more quickly the more water you apply to the turf and the more fertilizer you put on the turf. So we're trying to control those inputs throughout the year. So the turf needs a certain amount of water and it needs a certain amount of fertilizer, nitrogen in particular, to keep it healthy. So we're trying to put the right amount of nitrogen on and the right amount of water and make sure that the water that's applied is available to the plant. And that might sound silly, but it's not always the case. The water you apply is available to the plant because if you've got hydrophobic soil, which can develop as a result of fungal activity in the soil, then the water just runs off those areas. Yeah. And those areas just get drier and drier and drier until they die.
And hydrophobic soil, just to jump in, for the listeners' benefit, I think with the Black Coal report you sent round last year, perhaps the first time we were reading through it, and I'm around thinking there was an excerpt there of a couple of photographs of two soil extractions side by side, and there was one where you sort of tip some water over it and it would run into the soil and drain away, and the other where it literally just rolled around on the top of it like a bubble.
Yeah.
That's hydrophobic soil
Absolutely.
there.
So within a golf green, I mean, everybody thinks that a golf green is consistent across its surface. Well, it might be if you've rebuilt it, or if it's completely built of sand. But most of our inland greens are not like that. So that you've got native soil really, which can vary. And within a golf green, you've got different rates of drying down that occur. So what we try and do, what greenkeeping teams will do at the start of the year, is apply what we call wetting agents, which are effectively surfactants that we apply to the surfaces. Now, we normally apply these pretty regularly. I'm always advocating that we start early with them. So the first surfactants need to be applied to soils before there's even a hint of any drying down, and they'll go on roughly monthly. Now, the idea of those surfactants is to try and protect the soils from becoming hydrophobic. Once a soil has become hydrophobic, it's very, very difficult to re-wet it. So there are different types of surfactants that we would use to re-wet soils that have become very, very dry. But if you've got high levels of organic matter, you're more prone to hydrophobic soil, because the organisms that cause hydrophobicity are primarily fungi, and the exudates from those fungi coat sand particles and soil particles and make them hydrophobic.
They're like Gore-Tex. It's like literally pouring water on a
so
Gore-Tex jacket.
You can literally take two cores out a foot apart. One of them will be perfectly hydrophilic, and the water will go in and be available to plant roots. And then a foot away, it just runs off.
Crazy.
It's actually quite a good demonstration. If you get golf club members out there who have not seen that before, it's quite compelling to see the impact that condition can have. So high levels of organic matter are not good for many reasons. Primarily, or not primarily, but one of the reasons is hydrophobic soil. But most of the pathogenic fungi that cause turf disease live in that layer as well. And also that layer, depending on the grass type that's produced it, tends to be very water retentive. But fescue thatch is less water retentive than meadowgrass thatch. So if you've got meadowgrass greens, and you've got an organic matter number of 5%, let's say, then that's going to be more water retentive and softer than a fescue green that's got an organic matter content of 5%. Because the fescue thatch tends to be woodier, it's got more lignin in it. Yeah. So it doesn't tend to absorb it. It's not as cellulitic as the meadowgrass thatch. So if you've got meadowgrass greens, you've got to work a little bit harder on your organic matter numbers to get them to the level that is acceptable for year-round golf. So we have different targets at different clubs depending on the grass type that we're dealing with.
Scarification, that's like almost dragging a rake behind on a
that's
buggy,
like
and just kind of it catches the thicker bits of the organic matter and sort of pulls that out.
Yeah, if you could imagine 20 circular saws in parallel and you just drop that into the surface of the turf, that's effectively what we're doing when we're scarifying. Yeah. And then some of the technology that we've got now, have a sand tray behind that system to drop sand into the grooves that are created by the scarifying tool. So we can take out that technique is actually very good at taking out surface organic matter. So if your problem is in the top 5, 10, 15, 20 mil, that tool's quite useful. But if your organic matter problem is a little bit deeper, then often you'll need to use that in combination with some hollow coring, which can go deeper. But hollow coring generally is not quite as efficient as the.
Now that's drilling. Hollow coring would be sort of vertically kind of drilling.
Yeah, that's a cam action, putting a vertical core hole in the turf and pulling it out. So the thing that members hate. Yeah. Because you've then got to fill those holes with sand, to aid recovery. And one of the other challenges we're having around all of this as well is leather jackets. Now, what are leather jackets? Well, leather jackets are the grubs of crane flies. So you'll see the crane flies flying around in August, September. They lay eggs. Those eggs hatch into grubs. Those grubs eat the roots of grass plants. If we aerate at the wrong time, and there are a large number of grubs, then the grubs can get into the aeration holes and prevent those aeration holes from recovering.
Is that right? I've always wondered what a leather jacket infestation was.
Yeah.
I knew it was obviously a bug of some description. But I didn't realise it was because we let them in. I thought they just kind of...
Well, we have to be... If we'd been having this conversation 10 years ago, then leather jackets really... We were aware of them, but we just sprayed them. We sprayed them with an organophosphate insecticide and they were gone. They were not a problem. phosphate insecticides, not nice. Quite rightly, they were banned. We've now got one insecticide left that we can use called acelepryn. We've also got sort of biological control measures, nematodes, etc., that we can use to help control leather jackets. But the products we've got now are not nearly as efficient as the ones that have been banned. So we just have to be more aware of, what's going on around leather jacket populations, and if we're doing aeration work to rectify profile weakness, then we need to make sure that the leather jacket numbers are not a problem or have been sprayed to our satisfaction.
Do you think that even though technology's improved and knowledge has improved about sort of the subject matter, do you think it's more difficult now than it ever has been to keep a golf course sustainable and healthy?
Yeah, great question, Tom. And I think the answer to that is definitely yes. And I think it's partly because the expectation of golfers now is just really in the cosmics because of what we see on TV. So everything we see week in, week out on the television is from, generally speaking, from a warm, sunny part of the world.
Yeah. Anecdotally, have green speeds in the UK, have they been increased?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've increased over the years.
They have.
And yeah, there's
because
more
of
and
that,
more. Because of what we see on TV,
Yeah.
there's more and more of a demand for, that on a day-to-day basis. But just in simple terms, the quality is delivered at championship and, tour level by repetition, really. It's a little bit about height of cut, but it's more about repetition, and it's about the frequency of mowing and the frequency of rolling. So, for example, at the Open this year, Royal Liverpool routinely will have 12, 13 staff. So Bledge has, himself and 11, 12 other guys that will help him do the work on a day-to-day basis for the members, and that's great. And that level of resource helps him produce a high standard. A lot of golf clubs don't have anything like that. A lot of UK golf clubs, average member golf clubs in the UK, might have 5 or 6 staff. That's all they've got.
It's quite a common number.
Yeah. But back to the Open scenario. So for the Open itself, Bledge's resource level swells from 12, 13 to 45, 46 for the Open.
And a personal videographer.
And a personal videographer.
That is a shameless plug from you.
The film you produced was superb, I may say so. So you can see that the resource level triples. So our ability to double cut, triple cut, double cut in the evening, roll if we want to. We're not great fans of rolling, at Open level. But
why is that? Just a quick one. Yeah.
Just simply because we felt with the data that we collect a lot of data, so we know an awful lot about Open golf greens, throughout the year, but particularly in the build up to an Open Championship. We just felt that rolling tends to add a level of inconsistency that we don't really like. And if you think of an Open Thursday or an Open Friday, play starts at 6:30 in the morning and they're still playing at 9:30 at night. Greens are cut before 6:30, so it might be a 4:30 cut that's got to last to 9:30 at night. So
and if you
rolling tends to give you an instant effect, but it doesn't tend to last as long as a mow and a roll. And obviously we were using pedestrian units, so we were getting a mow and a roll from those units. But the point I was making, Bruce, was that the quality, the polish comes from the repetition of mowing, and that gives you the excellence. But you get that from a resource level that is not available day to day at members' clubs.
It's not sustainable for healthy grass. It
isn't. So what the members' clubs do, they don't have that level of resource. They just cut lower.
Yeah.
To produce the same effect. But of course, that low cutting, you cut greens routinely below 4 mil, you start to stress the plant. And now, there are guys out there advocating that greens should be cut at 2 mil. Well, look, what are you going to grow at? What are you going to grow at 2 mil? You're going to grow. You might produce a good surface for short periods of time, and you might produce extreme speed at those sorts of heights of cut. But you've got to be very, very good at what you do to keep the grass alive at that sort of level. And I don't believe personally that really is a sustainable route we should be taking.
You need some chemical help as well, I guess. You
need more chemical help at 2 mil than you need at 4 mil. So where are we going? Less chemicals. We've got to try and educate the golfer that reasonable speeds on a year-round basis are better than extreme speeds for short periods of the year, because everything is pushing us towards the need for chemical-free management, and it's inevitable. That journey is going one way and one way only.
Do you think clubs
and we're in a privileged position that we have access to EU and the discussions that are going on within Europe about pesticides, and it's in a way we are supportive of reductions in pesticides, because pesticides are not great for human health and for the environment generally. So reductions in pesticides we're positive about, but we're also passionate about protecting the game and making sure that it's thriving in 50 years' time. So we don't want standards to drop. So we've got to find ways of maintaining turf without chemicals.
It's funny.
And that's really our mission. We're all the team that I'm working with. We're all really passionate about that, and we want to see great golf courses every time we walk through the gate. We want to give guidance that delivers excellence. But it's becoming more challenging to do that as these pesticides are removed. And the thinking is by the end of the decade we are certainly not going to have the pesticides available to us that we have now. That's for sure.
Do you think your message is being heard?
I think that's another great question. I think it's being heard loud and clear by greenkeepers and by the turf industry. Yeah. And I think the majority of people within the turf industry and advocates within the turf industry understand the dynamics. And are trying their best to communicate it. We are responsible for communicating that message. That's why we're doing what we're doing at the RNA. That's why we've set up, a Sustainable Agronomy Service. It's why we do the championship agronomy that we do. It's why we promote green links, so we promote sustainability through our championships. It's why we're spending money on research through our Golf Course 2030 program. And it's why we're passionate about educating the next generation of greenkeepers. So all of those pillars, as we call them, are absolutely fundamental to us as the governing body of the game of golf. Where we struggle, I think, is getting the message about pesticide-free management to golfers. And that's why it's great to be given the opportunity by you guys to do this, because, hopefully golfers out there, some golfers out there will listen to this. And we'll hopefully sort of understand a little bit more about where we stand at the moment and the challenges that face the industry and face greenkeeping in particular.
It's quite funny. Sam and I earlier on this year, I can't remember when, we did a little tour of the Hebrides, and when I played some of those golf courses, Askanish, we played Dunavity, Machrihanish, Try, Isla Harris. Isla Harris is an interesting one, one greenkeeper. It's just, and lots of these places, Askanish hasn't got many. And it's funny how when you go to these places that are maintained on such low budgets, you're really happy to be like, yeah, they run at 6, that's fine. Like, I've got no problem with that. I understand that they're running on a really low budget. But when you do go to somewhere where it's suddenly £100 a green fee, or, it's got a really high reputation, you go in and if it run at 6, you're a bit like, and even even me, I'm not gonna like, oh yeah, they could have been a bit quicker. It's so hard to get away from that. It's really difficult.
Absolutely, and there's an element of that in all of us. I mean, what you've just described is rustic excellence, isn't it? And those golf courses are probably being maintained in a similar fashion to the way they were maintained in 1920. Probably not a lot has changed. Yeah. And I don't want to sit here and sound like a Luddite. The game's moved on and technology's moved on. And I'm a passionate believer that, we must use modern technology to the best we can, the best way we can. But it is very, very important for golfers to understand that producing green speeds in excess of 9.5 on a day-to-day basis is really becoming more and more challenging and is not sustainable. And there's got to be an understanding that green speed has to be aligned to resource levels and budgets. And we've got to be reasonable in our expectations, as we move forward. And that's not to say that when we go and play golf, we don't have a sort of an authentic and enjoyable and fun experience, because that's why we all play golf. because we get a tremendous amount of enjoyment out of it, and I want everybody who comes through every gate of every golf club to enjoy their game. But personally, I don't understand why greens have to be running at 11 and 12 for the game to be enjoyable.
No, they're not designed, are they? Fundamentally, I mean, I was lucky enough to go out to New York last week and play a bit of golf out there at some quite historic courses, a couple of Tillinghast courses, and we were blessed with great weather. They kind of figured it was sort of the last great week of the year, so the superintendent's got the greens rolling at about 12.5 on the stimp meter, which was just, I mean, it was great fun, but the members we were playing with, it's just not playable because it's so fast. The greens are rolling so quickly, and the game, when these great courses were laid out by the architects back in the 20s and 30s, I mean, what was the average green speed? 6,
Those 12
7
would have been 8.
Yeah. And I don't know. I'm not sure if golf was necessarily designed to be played at 13 on the stimp meter, but it's probably, and maybe this is a bit unkind, but the Augusta national effect of just watching that captivating TV where the best players in the world are putting off greens and having 4 putts and struggling, and we kind of think, yeah, we want to have a bit of a taste of that, but the reality is it's not something that's necessarily sustainable over the long term.
It's simply not sustainable in this country. And what does it do for the pace of play as well? I mean,
that's an additional.
And we're talking about it. You're an elite golfer, Bruce. I mean,
I wouldn't go that far.
Yes.
If you think the majority of people who play the game and enjoy it, are playing off 15, 18, 20 handicap.
I heard
So
a
you've got to think
statistic.
about it from everybody's perspective and be reasonable. And it's not that we can't do it. You could go out there tomorrow and ask Luke to shave the greens down to 1.5, 2 mil, and he could do it.
Yeah.
And he'd produce ridiculously quick greens. But it's just not going to do Blackwell Golf Club any good at all, or any golf club any good at all.
In the long run. And
I heard a statistic, you might know if this is true or not, that for every foot the stimp increases, it would take a 4-ball of 18 handicappers an additional half hour to complete the round.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable.
90 to what, 360 shots.
Absolutely.
And when it's now, you've got 4 or 5 extra putts around, it's just...
Yeah, because the 30-footer that was quite easy to lag up at a green speed of 9.5 becomes very difficult to lag up at 10.5 and 11. But I still feel you can have an authentic and enjoyable game of golf in the UK at green speeds around 9.5 feet.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think...
And I think that is a reasonable objective for golf clubs to have, and it's a reasonable objective for greenkeepers to be able to work towards. But once we start getting these demands of green speeds beyond 10 feet, then it just becomes very, very challenging for them to do, and it'll become increasingly challenging as the years go by.
And I guess actually most golfers would probably accept that they'd want a uniform, healthy surface above all.
100%.
That rolls quite true, rather than something that's lightning quick and maybe bumping all over the place, and then it's actually not in great condition for
and
the rest of the year because you've stressed it. Yeah, you want uniformity across all 18. I think there's just that. You mentioned it at the beginning, Alistair. Like, we're kind of in an age of instant gratification where we want something kind of to be immediate, but what we've been talking about on this podcast, sort of gradually changing a bit of soil composition, trying to encourage the right species of grass. It all takes time, and it's a matter of years to see the kind of benefits of this process, and there's definitely, I think, a bit of an obligation on the club golfer to maybe be a bit more accepting and kind of realise that it's going to take a bit of time to get there, and it needs to be carefully managed. We're kind of custodians of these great golf courses, really.
We are, absolutely. All the memberships of all the great courses are, we are just that, custodians, and the greenkeepers out there are doing their best to deliver. So it's important that we recognise what they do. We recognise the importance of what they do, because, as I said earlier on, without them we don't have a game. So we're passionate about creating the best golf course we can, the best presented golf course we can, best conditioned golf course we can, the most sustainable golf course we can. But we need sort of expectations to be tempered and to be reasonable amongst golfers as well. And that's, unless we can achieve that, it's going to be an uphill battle for everybody going forward, because greenkeeping is going to become more difficult. And whilst we don't want standards to drop, we want to set up a sort of a good benchmark for golf course standards. But we've got to support the greenkeeping industry as best we can.
Very well said. I think a perfect place to kind of draw a line towards the end of this podcast. Just before we do, Alistair, your role within the RNA is part of your role within the RNA is consultancy amongst clubs. Is it open for any club to get in touch and say we'd like to inquire about some? How does that process work?
It is. No, absolutely. We are here. We want to feel as though we're accessible to every club, whatever level of golf, whatever type of facility you have in the UK. We are open for consultation, and we're not charging huge amounts of money for the work that we do. It is a fee-earning service, but the money that we generate from that fee-earning service goes back into the betterment of the game, and particularly greenkeeper education and turfgrass research. So it'll take us forward in the future. So Sustainable Agronomy at randa.org is the contact email for anybody who's interested.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. We had a very enjoyable discussion with Case Collar about this time last year in the Netherlands, and I think you and Case and the whole RNA team are doing a brilliant job in kind of making us all aware of the great work you're doing. And I've certainly learned a lot in this podcast about sward and different grass types and fine leaf grasses. So, thank you very much for joining us, and catch up soon.
No, great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Watch this.